We're taught that ancient humans were slow, simple, and clueless until civilization finally clicked. That version of history collapses fast. In this video are 44 real discoveries that shouldn't exist where they do. Machines before industry, science before textbooks, and ideas so advanced they still confuse experts. This isn't legend or myth. It's the past quietly exposing how wrong the timeline really is. 1. The ancient Greeks actually invented a steam engine called the Iolipoli in the 1st century and proceeded to do absolutely nothing useful with it. Hero of Alexandria built this spinning metal sphere that shot out steam and moved rapidly, which is the basic technology needed for a train or a factory. But instead of kickstarting an industrial revolution and taking over the world, they just put it on a table to entertain rich guys at dinner parties. It is honestly hilarious that they had the key to infinite power sitting right next to the fruit bowl and just clapped at it because it made a funny whooshing sound. 2. The Romans literally ate a plant into extinction because it was the best oral contraceptive in the ancient world, and that is why we can't have nice things. It was called silphium, and it was worth its weight in gold because it tasted great and apparently prevented pregnancy effectively. They harvested it so aggressively for their romantic escapades that the last known stalk was reportedly given to Emperor Nero as a curiosity, and he just ate it. It is the ultimate tragic comedy. An entire species of plant was wiped off the face of the planet just because the Romans couldn't keep their hands off each other. 3. History books usually say we learned to farm and then got smart enough to build temples. But Göbekli Tepe in Turkey proves we were actually overachieving workaholics way before that. This site is 12,000 years old and full of massive carved stone pillars weighing tons, yet it was built by hunter-gatherers who didn't even have wheels or pottery. These dudes were literally dragging giant rocks around just to show off to the sky gods before they even figured out how to grow wheat. It turns out the urge to build a giant heavy cathedral was so strong that we had to invent farming just to feed the poor guys hauling the stones. 4. Divers in Greece found the Antikythera mechanism, which is basically an ancient computer that has no business existing in a time when people were still wearing bed sheets. It had over 30 complex bronze gears that could predict eclipses and track the movements of the planets with a level of accuracy that makes zero sense for the 2nd century BC. It is like opening a tomb and finding a pocket watch inside a dinosaur. Some Greek genius was building advanced clockwork machinery to track the Olympics while everyone else was just trying not to die of a toothache. And then we just forgot how to do it for 1,000 years. 5. You might think Stone Age medicine was just a guy with a magic stick, but ancient doctors were drilling holes in people's skulls and the patients actually liked it. It is called trepanation, and we have found thousands of skulls with healed holes, meaning these people survived the surgery and lived for years. These prehistoric surgeons were cutting into brains with sharp rocks to cure headaches or let out bad spirits, and somehow they didn't kill everyone. It is absolutely wild to think that someone had a migraine so bad that they let a guy named Og drill into their head with a piece of flint and then walked it off. 6. In the Middle Ages, if a pig committed a crime, they didn't just eat it. They actually put it on trial with a full legal team. There are verified historical records of animals, especially pigs, being arrested for attacking people, thrown into jail, and given a defense lawyer. They would have a judge, witnesses, and a prosecutor arguing the case in court as if the pig understood what was happening. Sometimes the animals were acquitted if they had good character witnesses, but often they were sentenced to death. It is the peak of human absurdity that we treated farm animals like citizens just so we could legally hang them for being naughty. 7. In the 1930s, archaeologists near Baghdad uncovered a strange clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod, and it instantly raised eyebrows. When filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar, the setup can produce a small electric charge, which is why it became known as the Baghdad battery. The problem is, nobody can agree what it was actually for. Some say electroplating, others say ritual storage, and some say it was never meant to be electrical at all. Either way, it is one of those artifacts that looks way too modern for its own good and still makes historians uncomfortable. 8. The Roman dodecahedron is the most frustrating object in archaeology because we have found hundreds of them, and we still have zero clue what they are for. These are hollow, bronze, 12-sided shapes with knobs on the corners and different-sized holes on each face, looking like a complex piece of machinery. The Romans were obsessed with recording every single detail of their lives, yet they didn't write a single word about these things. It drives historians crazy because these objects were clearly mass-produced and important, yet they took the secret to the grave. It is the ultimate prank because we are still staring at them 2,000 years later scratching our heads. 9. The Lycurgus cup is a Roman glass chalice from the 4th century that proves ancient craftsmen were doing nanotechnology long before we even knew what an atom was. When you look at the cup in normal light, it appears opaque green, but if you shine light through it from the inside, it glows a fiery red. This isn't magic. It is the result of gold and silver particles ground down to 50 nanometers, which is so small you would need a microscope to see them. It is honestly embarrassing for us that they figured out how to manipulate matter at a molecular level just to make a fancy cup for drinking wine. 10. An ancient army once lost a battle because they got the munchies for the wrong snack, proving that biological warfare is older than we think. In 67 BC, King Mithridates left pots of mad honey along the road for the pursuing Roman army. This honey was made by bees that fed on toxic rhododendron flowers, which causes hallucinations and severe dizziness. The Roman soldiers thought they scored free food, ate it all, and ended up stumbling around stoned out of their minds. The king's army then returned and slaughtered the intoxicated Romans. It is arguably the most embarrassing military defeat in history, caused entirely because elite soldiers couldn't resist a sweet treat. 11. Ancient texts describe the world in ways that feel alien to us, especially when it comes to color. Homer famously called the sea wine dark, and many ancient languages grouped blue together with green or dark shades instead of treating it as its own category. Some researchers argue that language influences how people mentally categorize colors, while others insist ancient people obviously saw blue but just described it differently. Either way, it is wild to realize that the sky and ocean were talked about in a completely different mental framework, reminding us that reality itself feels different depending on the words you grow up with. 12. The Great Wall of China refuses to fall apart, and the reason is surprisingly edible. During the Ming Dynasty, builders mixed sticky rice soup into the mortar, creating an organic compound that bonded stone far better than lime alone. Modern tests show this rice-based mortar is unusually durable and resistant to erosion. It is both impressive and ridiculous that one of the largest defensive structures in human history owes its longevity to a recipe that sounds like lunch. The wall didn't survive because of magic or brute force, but because someone thought, what if we add dinner? 13. The Voynich manuscript is the ultimate historical troll because it is a 200-page book from the 15th century that nobody on Earth can read. It is written in a completely made-up language with a unique alphabet and filled with drawings of plants that do not exist in nature and naked women bathing in green tubes. The best code breakers from both world wars tried to crack it and failed miserably, which is just embarrassing for modern intelligence agencies. It is either the work of a mad genius recording the secrets of the universe, or just a very dedicated prankster who wanted to confuse people for 600 years. 14. Crusaders feared Damascus steel because the blades were absurdly sharp, flexible, and strong, yet nobody could quite explain why. The metal showed strange flowing patterns and mechanical properties that European smiths could not replicate, and the exact method was eventually lost. Modern analysis suggests the steel formed unusual microstructures during forging that helped explain its legendary performance. People love calling it ancient nanotechnology, but the real mystery is simpler and more frustrating. Medieval blacksmiths accidentally mastered material science tricks that took us centuries to understand again. 15. For centuries, Viking stories about navigating with magical sunstones sounded like drunken sailor nonsense. Then scientists discovered that crystals like Iceland's spar can reveal the sun's position through polarized light, even in heavy clouds or near sunset. This technique would have allowed Vikings to sail confidently across open ocean without hugging coastlines, reaching places like North America centuries before Columbus. It looks like superstition, feels like wizardry, and turns out to be clever applied physics disguised as mythology. 16. In 132 AD, a Chinese genius named Zhang Heng invented an earthquake detector that looks exactly like a bizarre carnival game. It was a giant bronze jar featuring 8 dragons facing downwards, each holding a metal ball in its mouth, with 8 open-mouthed metal frogs sitting on the floor below them. When an earthquake hit hundreds of miles away, the vibration would trigger a mechanism that dropped a ball from a dragon into a frog, making a loud clang. It is absolutely hilarious that the first high-tech seismograph in history relied on metal frogs catching balls to save the empire from destruction. 17. If you think you are an introvert, you have nothing on the people of Derinkuyu in Turkey, who built an 18-story city entirely underground just to avoid the neighbors. This isn't a damp cave. It is a massive complex carved out of solid volcanic rock that could house 20,000 people along with their goats, food stores, and wine presses. They had ventilation shafts and heavy stone doors to block intruders, essentially living like sophisticated ants. It is mind-blowing that they moved millions of tons of rock with hand tools to create a luxury doomsday bunker so complex that we didn't even know it was there until a guy knocked down a wall in his basement. 18. The Catholic Church once held a trial that was so insane it sounds like a horror movie sketch, known as the Cadaver Synod. In 897, Pope Stephen VI dug up the rotting corpse of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, dressed the dead body in fancy robes, and propped it up on a throne to stand trial for perjury. They literally screamed questions at a skeleton and had a deacon answer for him. The corpse was found guilty, stripped, and thrown into the river. It proves that ancient politics were not just dirty. They were completely psychotic, and holding a grudge meant you weren't safe even after you were dead and buried. 19. In 1513, Ottoman Admiral Piri Reis drew a world map that has caused non-stop arguments ever since. Parts of it look surprisingly detailed for the time, and he claimed it was compiled from much older source maps that no longer exist. Some people insist it shows impossible knowledge. Others say it is just a messy patchwork of coastlines copied from different eras and perspectives. The real discovery is not secret ancient civilizations, but how one imperfect map turned into one of the most hotly debated objects in historical cartography. 20. The Spartans were the toughest warriors in history, but their secret weapon wasn't their swords. It was their disgusting food that made them not care if they died. Their staple meal was black broth, which consisted of pork boiled in blood, salt, and vinegar. It was reportedly so vile that a visitor from another city tasted it and said, "Now I understand why Spartans are not afraid to die." It is hilarious that they built the most feared military machine in existence partly by feeding them soup so terrible that death on the battlefield seemed like a better option than dinner. 21. When archaeologists pulled the sword of Gujian from a flooded tomb in China, they expected corrosion and disappointment. Instead, the blade emerged shiny, sharp, and almost untouched after more than 2,000 years underground. Rather than secret chromium plating, researchers now think its preservation came from a combination of a sophisticated bronze alloy, protective surface layers, and an unusually airtight scabbard. The real shock is not magic metal, but how well ancient craftsmen understood materials and storage long before modern chemistry existed. 22. The Phaistos disc from Crete looks like something that should not exist in the ancient world. Instead of being carved by hand, its symbols were pressed into wet clay using reusable stamps, meaning the creator was thinking in terms of repetition and standardization. That does not mean they invented full printing, but it does suggest proto-printing ideas thousands of years earlier than expected. And somehow, they used this clever system exactly once to produce a disc nobody can read, then apparently abandoned the idea forever, just to spite future historians. 23. In ancient Rome, people were terrified of being poisoned, so the rich relied on a bizarre solution that sounds like pure paranoia. Wealthy families kept professional food tasters, whose only job was to eat every meal first and wait to see if they collapsed. Some emperors even trained their bodies by taking tiny doses of poison daily to build immunity, a practice known as Mithridatism. Dining was less about pleasure and more like a slow-motion game of Russian roulette, proving that luxury in the ancient world often came with a side of existential dread. 24. Scattered across the hills of Laos are thousands of massive stone jars, some weighing up to 30 tons, and absolutely nobody knows why they are there. It is called the Plain of Jars, and it looks like a race of giants had a massive frat party and left their cups behind. Local legends actually say giants used them to store rice wine, which honestly makes more sense than the idea that ancient humans dragged 30-ton rocks up a mountain just to store dead bodies or rainwater. The sheer effort to carve and move these monsters is staggering, and the lack of explanation makes it feel like the ancients are just trolling us. 25. A polished rock crystal found in the Assyrian city of Nimrud has sparked endless debate because it functions as a powerful convex lens. Known as the Nimrud lens, it can magnify objects clearly, leading some to wonder if it was used for astronomy or precision work. Others argue it may have been decorative or symbolic. What matters is that ancient artisans knew how to grind and shape crystal with optical precision, even if we still argue about what they actually used it for. 26. We tend to think of plastic surgery as a modern obsession for celebrities who want perfect noses. But doctors in India were doing complex rhinoplasty in 600 BC. A physician named Sushruta wrote a medical text describing exactly how to cut a flap of skin from the forehead and stitch it down to reconstruct a nose, which is a technique surgeons still use today. It is absolutely wild because they weren't doing this for beauty pageants. They were fixing faces because cutting off noses was a common punishment for crimes back then. It is humiliating that an ancient guy without electricity figured out skin grafts perfectly. 27. If you think Pythagoras was the genius who invented the famous triangle theorem, you have been lied to, because a clay tablet from Babylon called Plimpton 322 proves they beat him to it by 1,000 years. This tablet isn't just a doodle. It is a sophisticated list of 15 Pythagorean triples written in a base 60 number system that is actually more accurate than our base 10 system for trigonometry. It is shocking to realize that while the Greeks were still figuring out how to wear togas, Babylonian accountants were doing high-level math on wet clay that would make a modern high school student cry. 28. Emperor Caligula's Nemi ships were not just boats. They were floating luxury complexes built purely for indulgence. These massive barges featured plumbing, heating systems, decorative marble, and mechanical components that feel shockingly advanced for Roman pleasure craft. They were essentially ancient party palaces drifting on a lake, built with engineering skill that had no military or practical purpose. It is both impressive and ridiculous that such sophisticated technology was deployed not to build cities or save lives, but to make one man's weekends more extravagant. 29. Ancient Egyptian pregnancy tests sound like superstition until you realize they actually worked sometimes. Medical texts instructed women to urinate on bags of barley and wheat, and if the grain sprouted, pregnancy was likely. Modern experiments showed the hormones present in pregnant urine can stimulate plant growth under certain conditions. It was not perfect science, but it was a shockingly clever biological test using nothing more than grain, observation, and patience thousands of years before laboratories existed. 30. We usually imagine ancient prosthetics as just a pirate with a wooden peg leg, but a 3,000-year-old wooden toe found on a mummy in Cairo is a biomedical masterpiece. It wasn't just a stiff piece of wood. It was carved in 3 sections and laced together with leather to bend exactly like a real toe, helping the person walk naturally in sandals. This proves they understood biomechanics and ergonomics perfectly, and cared enough to engineer a functional medical device for someone's foot. It is absurdly impressive that they were custom-building articulated limbs to help people walk comfortably into the afterlife. 31. We think of vending machines as a modern convenience for getting a bag of chips, but Hero of Alexandria, actually invented the first coin-operated dispenser in the 1st century. It stood in temples and dispensed holy water because, apparently, priests were tired of people taking more than their fair share. The mechanics were genius. You dropped a coin in a slot, it hit a lever, opened a valve, and let out a specific amount of water before the coin slid off. It is absolutely hilarious that the great-great-grandfather of the soda machine was created so Greeks could automate religion. 32. Archaeologists studying Ice Age caves in Europe made a discovery that completely rewrote what we thought early humans were capable of. Deep inside these caves, far from natural light, they found paintings that align with the movement of animals across the seasons and even lunar cycles. This means people living over 30,000 years ago were not just drawing animals for fun, but tracking time, migration, and patterns in nature. While we imagined them barely surviving, they were already thinking in calendars and long-term systems carved into stone. 33. In a cave system in France, archaeologists discovered prehistoric wall markings that should not exist according to old timelines. These were not crude doodles, but carefully planned markings that aligned with seasonal light patterns and lunar cycles. The evidence suggests Ice Age humans were tracking time, seasons, and celestial events tens of thousands of years earlier than previously believed. This discovery forced historians to accept that people we once dismissed as barely surviving were already thinking in calendars, cycles, and long-term planning while wearing animal skins. 34. Roman concrete is evidently magical because it sits in the ocean for 2,000 years and just gets harder while our stuff crumbles if you look at it wrong. Scientists found that when seawater hits the volcanic ash in their mixture, it creates a chemical reaction that actually heals cracks and strengthens the rock. The Romans were so good at building that they accidentally invented a material that eats the ocean for breakfast. It is kind of embarrassing that a bunch of guys in sandals without fancy degrees figured out how to build indestructible harbors while we are still patching the same potholes every single spring. 35. In Peru, the Incas built a fortress called Sacsayhuaman that effectively laughs in the face of modern engineering because the stones are terrifyingly huge. We are talking about limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons that were cut and stacked so perfectly that you cannot fit a single piece of paper between them today. They did this without wheels, iron tools, or mortar, basically playing a game of Tetris on God mode while the rest of the world was struggling to stack mud bricks. It is completely absurd that they moved these monster rocks up a mountain and locked them together so tightly that they survive massive earthquakes. 36. The Romans were obsessed with having pearly white teeth, and their secret whitening ingredient is disgusting enough to make you vomit. They used urine. Specifically, they believed that Portuguese urine was the strongest in the world, so they actually imported jars of pee from Portugal to rinse their mouths. The science is technically sound because the ammonia in urine is a cleaning agent, but it is absolutely insane to imagine a wealthy Roman aristocrat gargling imported pee before kissing his wife. It is the grossest beauty trend in history, proving that people have always been willing to do incredibly stupid things just to look good in public. 37. In 240 BC, a Greek guy named Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with shocking accuracy using nothing but a stick and a shadow. He noticed that at noon in one city, a stick cast no shadow, while in another city, it did. By measuring the angle of the shadow and the distance between the cities, he used basic geometry to figure out the size of the planet. It is hilarious that one dude with a stick proved the Earth was round over 2,000 years ago, while today we still have people with internet access arguing that it is flat. 38. The Byzantine Empire had a secret weapon called Greek fire that was so terrifying it could burn on top of water, and the recipe was so secret that we actually lost it forever. It was a liquid mixture that they sprayed from siphons onto enemy ships, turning the ocean into a literal inferno that water couldn't extinguish. It saved Constantinople from sieges multiple times because enemy fleets would just watch their boats melt while the sea caught fire around them. The absurd part is that the formula was known only to the emperor and a few chemists, and when the empire fell, the recipe disappeared with them. 39. Ancient accounts claim that during the siege of Syracuse, the Romans feared an invention attributed to Archimedes known as the Iron Hand. Descriptions suggest a massive mechanical claw used to grab enemy ships, lift them partially from the water, and drop them back down, causing chaos and panic. While the exact design is still debated, multiple sources agree something terrifying enough existed to make trained soldiers flee from floating debris. It is deeply unfair that a mathematician almost defeated an empire with ropes, levers, and pure spite. 40. Ancient Persians in 400 BC were eating ice cream in the middle of the scorching desert thanks to an engineering marvel called the yakshal. These were massive, cone-shaped structures that used evaporation and wind catchers to keep ice frozen all year round, even when it was blazing hot outside. They stored ice brought from the mountains or formed during freezing winter nights and used it to make chilled desserts for royalty in the summer. It is mind-blowing that they mastered thermodynamics to create a zero-energy refrigerator millennia ago, while we panic and lose all our food if the power goes out for 3 hours. 41. If you visit the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, you expect to see holy mosaics, but on the marble railing of the upper gallery, there is scratched graffiti that basically says, Halfdan was here. It was carved by a Viking member of the Varangian Guard in the 9th century who was apparently bored during a long church service. It is deeply comforting to know that human nature hasn't changed at all in 1,000 years. This elite warrior traveled all the way from Scandinavia to the center of the civilized world. And his first instinct was to pull out a knife and etch his name into the furniture like a delinquent teenager. 42. Pythagoras is known for triangles, but he also invented the greedy cup, which is the best practical joke in ancient physics. The cup looks normal, and you can drink from it if you fill it halfway. But if you get greedy and fill it to the brim, a hidden siphon in the center column activates and drains the entire contents of the cup out of a hole in the bottom, spilling wine all over your lap. It was a party trick designed to teach moderation by humiliating the drinker. It is hilarious that one of the smartest men in history used his genius to engineer a stain-making machine just to laugh at his friends. 43. The Nebra Sky Disc forced historians to rethink Bronze Age Europe almost overnight. This bronze plate inlaid with gold symbols depicts the sun, moon, stars, and key celestial alignments, making it one of the oldest known concrete representations of astronomical knowledge. It was likely used to track seasons, synchronize calendars, and plan agriculture. The discovery shattered the idea that these societies were primitive, proving that people living in forests and fields were quietly studying the sky with serious scientific intent. 44. Roman gladiators were the superstar athletes of their day, but their sports drink wasn't Gatorade. It was a vinegar tonic mixed with the ash of charred plants. Analysis of their bones shows they had super high levels of strontium, which came from this disgusting ash drink they gulped down to help heal broken bones. They were basically drinking liquid fireplace leftovers to bulk up. It is wildly absurd that the toughest fighters in history were vegetarians who strengthened their bodies by chugging vinegar and burnt wood, proving that you don't need fancy protein shakes to survive a fight to the death. After 44 discoveries like these, pretending history makes sense feels dishonest. So here's the real question. What discovery, artifact, or ancient mystery did we miss that deserves to be on this list and would completely break it even more? Don't play it safe. Drop the one that annoys historians the most. Like the video if your timeline is broken, subscribe if you enjoy watching it fall apart.